This is James Orr. Join me tonight as your host of a magnificent ride. I'm James Orr, and Brian is joining me tonight. Brian is actually teaching the entire class. He just said, "You're on. Start recording. Please begin." So there you go.
Yes, please begin. Please end. All right. So what are we teaching tonight? Welcome to NCREG. Oh, man, I'm going so fast, I missed the slide. So listen up, everybody, especially tonight. Go into your chat. Change at the bottom where it says to. It currently says to all panelists. Change it to all panelists and attendees for everything you're going to type. If you don't, I'm going to call you out. Because it doesn't ask me anything. So you can ask me whatever you want, but I'm going to be like, yo, you only type that to panelists. So type it to everybody so everybody can see it, unless it's truly private and you just want to send it to James and I, and then we'll still read it. We just won't let you know who it's from. Question of the night. It's ask me absolutely anything or almost anything, or ask James whatever the hell you want. It's, whatever you want to do. Start typing your questions in and we will get to them. It's literally ask me. If you ask me, like, can you please tell me how to do asset protection? I will be like, no. But if you ask me a question about asset protection, I'll be happy to answer it. And Andrew, you were out of your allotted questions, so I'm not even going to read that question
because of the email we got sent.
Yep.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Question overload. See error -1. So coming up, James is going to teach a whole bunch of classes because it's fourth quarter and I'm really busy. Next week, mini class, which will be 8 hours long. Ultimate Guide to Earnest Money. It's going to teach you everything you need to know about earnest money and asset protection, right, James?
No, not asset protection.
Oh, I thought you were going to teach two things at once. I don't mini classes.
I honestly don't teach asset protection. I think I taught asset protection before you came along and taught some classes, and that was the last time it was ever taught.
I'm about to teach James's version of asset protection. Are you guys ready? So you need to see an attorney. Class is over.
That's not how I taught it before, but that is how I would teach it now.
Right.
Yeah, that's good.
What is the Ultimate Guide to Earnest Money? It's about earnest money and everything you need to know, and James will try to make it less than 2 hours. Right?
That's why it's called mini class.
That's why it's called a mini class. And then the following week is a 3-hour mini class. It's the cash flow power meter trademark +1 from Brian. My edit from last week is still in there on accident. That's pretty good. I just copied and pasted. So what is that one about? Why don't you tell us about that one? Because that one
actually, it will be less than 2 hours. It's about the new cash flow power meter tool that I created that shows you visually at a glance how well a property is cash flowing. And it looks at it from a whole bunch of angles, and it's a really cool mini visual tool that allows you to just see it quickly. So I'll go over that and show you how to access it and everything.
Sweet. And then the next week, stay tuned. It's something amazing.
Someone did ask asset protection question that's like, teach me asset protection class.
Perfect. I love it. I will answer almost everything tonight. I don't know what November 4th is, James. Do you know what November 4th is?
I don't yet. I still have to create a class for that.
Cool. And then the next week, in honor of Veterans Day, and by the way, James and Tammy are both veterans, so thank you for your service.
You're welcome.
James is going to do a special VA loans, the deep dive.
Yep. For all the veterans out there, you'll learn how to buy property with nothing down.
You have to know how to swim to come to that class since it's a deep dive and you were in the Navy?
No.
Okay.
No.
Good. All right. Let's get done with that. If you don't like the crap we're teaching, you can go here and tell us what you'd like to actually have us teach. Because that's how you can make us teach whatever you want. So go there, suggest new topics. And then if you want to hear all 257 topics, well, not really, but this is where you would go because there's some amazing content here. And you should go listen to it if you haven't already. Because probably every question that gets asked tonight, we're going to be like, well, there's a podcast that's 2 hours long on that. So you could listen to that, or we can answer your question.
We'll give you the 30-second answer, but go listen to the 2-hour class.
Exactly.
That's awesome.
And then we're almost to the whole deck. Like, this deck is the shortest deck ever. It's 12 slides. So COVID update. This is serious stuff.
Okay.
if you remember, like back here when James was like, yeah, it looks like it's going down. And I was like, yeah, but it's only one day and like blah, blah, blah. Guess what? We're still going up. In case you aren't aware, this number right here, 7.8 million, is insane, first of all. Second, that number was like a couple of weeks ago was under 6 million. We are rapidly seeing case growth. And as predicted, you had Labor Day stuff. Unfortunately, you've had a bunch of political things that are going on where people are unmasked, and one of those political things is now a super spreader event. Actually, multiple of those things. I just saw another article today. So please wear a mask. The cases are going to continue probably to go up, honestly, in my opinion, especially with the holidays coming and cold and flu season coming. And in case you're like, oh yeah, well we're lower than we were. Remember, back here is where we thought it would be like safe to open stuff up. We're still well above that. And in case you're like, well, not in my state, here's a bunch of stuff that's going on in a bunch of states. These graphs are insane. So if you're in any state, not just these states, please be careful. Please be smart. Wear masks. It's not that hard. Delinquency update. This is in dollars. I don't have a graph. I don't know how to graph things. James is really good at graphing things, but he doesn't send me any charts anymore, so I can't have the chart section. So I'm not going to, maybe if he makes a really nice chart of this that's, good and useful, we'll put it up here, but he didn't send it to me. October 7th, I didn't have the delinquency from last week. The property manager sent it to me like 2 hours after the meeting ended. It's like, I'm really sorry I didn't get this to you. So last week we were at basically 6% of rent dollars were missing. And this week we are down slightly under 5%. So I think that is good. When we kind of look back at September, definitely kind of on par with where September was. I'm happy that October is not a lot worse, but we will see as time goes on. So that part is good. This is a delinquency update, like how many actual units still owe rent, even if it's partial rent. We were at 8.27 on the 7th, which was lower than September on the 9th, which was good. And then October 13th, we're still lower than where September was a few days later. So the number of units owing rent is lower than September, but not by a lot. So I think we're kind of in the same boat. But hey, this is what's going on. And then the vacancy rate, 2.4% on October 7th, and it's slightly up on the 13th. And you might be like, how does that happen? Well, I can tell you exactly how it happens. People abandoned my duplex. And so I have to sublease that. And that's not all of it, but this is the property manager. So it's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of units. But stuff like that happens. James missed that whole conversation because he was off mic. But yes, that's what happens. That's why that's going up. And lastly, that is the last slide. So that was a great presentation, James. Good job.
Thank you.
Yeah, we'll see you next week for class. Right?
Thanks for coming, everybody. We really do appreciate it. Oh, my goodness. All right.
So I got to spread my chat window out here and see what's going on. So, James, how do you want to play this tonight? You're going to ask questions and I'm going to answer. That's your goal, so you don't have to do anything?
I think that seems reasonable. I could start with – I had a couple via email.
Oh, no.
Do you want to start with the email first, or do you want to start with –
Oh, my gosh.
The email guys, they did get it in first, technically.
Agree. All right.
So how do you want to do it? Do you want to, pick one from the email, then, come to the other stuff, then go back to the email?
I'm actually going to take the shorter of the two emails that we got first to get it kind of off the plate, and then we will work our way through the dissertation. So Hunter basically sent in to James and said, hey, I have a couple questions for you. The first one is, how long do you have to rent out a property after doing a 1031 exchange before you can move in as a primary resident? I've heard of seasoning the property before you move in to prove your intent to the IRS. Could you do this every time you buy a new house forever and ever until you die, effectively evading taxes on capital gains? I would not use the word evade taxes.
That was where I was going first. Yeah. Tax evasion is illegal.
Prison.
That's prison. Tax avoidance is something completely different and sort of allowed.
Yes. So I'm sure there are rules on the 1031 exchange and then being able to move back into it. You should call a 1031 provider and actually, because those rules do change from time to time. So you should call a 1031 provider and say, hey, am I allowed to move back in? Because I think you would have to wait at least a year to move back in from a 1031 perspective, because the 1031 is basically you are buying that property as an investment. You are not buying it with the intent to actually have it be your personal property. So I don't know that the 1031 would even like that within the first year or two. Very similar to if you do a 1031 and then you pull a bunch of cash out right after you do the 1031, they do not like that either. They generally want you to wait a year or more. So the answer that we got from
First of all, I want to say
Sure.
Brian is not an accountant. He's not a CPA. He's not an enrolled agent. And he's probably not qualified to give tax advice, nor am I. However, I did reach out to a guy that doesn't specialize in this specifically. You really should go talk to your CPA who does real estate stuff for you to find out the answer for your specific situation, because the details might matter. But I do have a kind of like somewhat professional opinion on this, and Brian will comment on that.
Oh, go ahead. You can give
So-
Jason's answer.
Yeah, so Jason basically said this person might be referring to the 5-year holding period. In order to apply the capital gain exclusion on the sale of a primary residence when such residence was acquired in a 1031 exchange, the property must be held for at least 5 years. So you have to hold it for 5 years. If the property is sold less than 5 years after the 1031, then there is zero capital gain exclusion allowed. So you can't do any exclusion of that. Regardless of how long the property was occupied as a primary, meaning even if they lived there for 2+ years, there is no capital gain exclusion, meaning you can't just do 2 years and then sell it, expect to do that. Once the 5-year holding period is met and it was a primary for 2+ years, it can be sold and the owner can receive a partial capital gain exclusion based on pro rata periods of qualifying versus non-qualifying use, which is a whole other conversation, according to them. And then finally, the part that I thought was where you were going with this, and Jason actually commented and said, then there is still depreciation recapture. That doesn't go away. That never gets timed away unless the owner dies and the property passes to the heirs. So if you don't remember this, you get the depreciation benefit, which is pretty significant. And over time, that accumulates, and that's a pretty high tax rate. And so that's one of the ones that I think you want. It's worse in many ways than the capital gains one. Capital gains, as long as it's more than a year, is lower than the depreciation recapture tax rate. And so this one doesn't go away even if you move in. That's my understanding, and that's what Jason's understanding is as well. So double check with your CPA. And again, we are not qualified to give this advice.
And while I'm not qualified to give the advice, what I said earlier actually is correct according to current 1031 exchange law. So I'm going to read this to you. Basically, there's no designated amount of time that you must hold a property before converting its use, but the IRS is going to look at your intent, which is exactly what they do if you 1031 and then pull a bunch of money out. They look at your intent and go, well, did you try and skirt paying taxes on the money? And if so, your intent is bad and you're probably going to get taxed. So your intention actually needs to be that you will hold the property for investment purposes, which probably means you're going to rent it out. If you 1031, it sits vacant for 2 months and you move in as your primary residence, you may not get caught, but it's not probably the best thing that you should do. So the government has twice proposed a required hold period of 1 year. So the recommendation, if you talk to a qualified person, they will probably recommend that you hold it for at least a year and a day before you make it your primary residence. And in that year and a day, I would probably highly suggest renting it out and documenting why suddenly it needed to become your personal residence, even if it's just on a piece of paper that's dated and signed and emailed to yourself. That's my take.
Yeah, if your intent going into this is to repeatedly do this with 5 or 10 or 20 properties, good luck standing in front of a tax person and trying to justify that as my intent was to have these as rentals.
Right.
I don't think that's
if you do this once and it's like, or 10 years later it happens again, and it's like, hey, I wasn't going to move, but then COVID happened and the tenant moved out and I had to move back in because I didn't have anywhere else to go, that's probably acceptable. If you do it every year and they're like, hey, I 1031 and then a year later I moved in and I 1031 something else and I moved in, probably not going to fly. All right. Second question from that email. This one's going to be all you, James. James, are you able to back out of a deal if you do a final walkthrough and see significant changes from when you first signed the contract? Generally, the final walkthrough isn't meant to be an out for the buyer, but are there any exceptions?
I don't know the answer to that. I have a feeling you would probably want to sue them in court and still close. That's my guess. I don't know. According to the actual written agreement, you do not have a way out. There's no written agreement that says you can get out at a final walkthrough if things are not bad. In fact, there's no obligation to have a final walkthrough. We do one as a matter of course as when with my clients, but there's nothing that says you need to actually see the property ever. I mean, there's no requirement there whatsoever. So no, there's no rule about doing that. And by the way, I'm specifically citing the Colorado Real Estate Commission contract. If you are in a different state, yours may have something completely different than this. So check your local contract for that. But no, I do not think you can get out. I think you'll need to actually either negotiate it before you sign the paperwork, or you'll have to pursue a remedy in court.
So James, what would happen if like everything looked great and 2 days before closing, the house like burned down?
Oh, that's covered in the
Right.
documents. Yeah, so if that is technically covered in there, and I'd have to go read that section again to find out, but I believe the seller is still responsible for providing the house like in a reasonable state.
Yep.
Yeah.
Cool. Well done.
Yeah.
And then Andrew's first question out of the gate. James, what games are you playing these days?
I'm playing Hearthstone mostly. Yeah, that's what I'm playing.
All right. So that's Andrew's. That's all of Andrew's questions.
That is not Andrew. Well, Andrew has a lot of questions, but go ahead. You do the order.
I'm kidding. So we will go to Andrew's email, which both James and I were like, we started reading. We're like, there's some good stuff in here, but we're like, I'm not reading that till class.
It's dense. It's like looking at Ulysses and being like, whoa, I'm sure this is a great book, but I mean, 15,000 pages. Come on.
Yeah. So we'll bounce in and out of this and try and cover everything. So first question on double ending transactions and getting a discount, which I think you mentioned last week.
A couple weeks ago. Yeah.
Yep. I bought 2 properties from agents who were double ending, not in Colorado, and I believe I've received a discount both times as a result. My method when buying on a double-ended transaction is to stop negotiating with a 1% distance between the seller offer and buyer offer. The agent then says he will negotiate an agent discount with the seller for double ending, and then magically our offer, which previously wasn't high enough, gets accepted. Do you think this is a legit tactic, or is this ruining the relationship with my agent, or worse?
I don't think it's worse. I think you got to realize that's probably not your agent if they are already representing the seller in the transaction, unless they are, and even if they are a transaction broker, although this isn't in this state, so it may have been different there. But if you're a transaction broker, that's not your agent. That's a referee trying to help the sale go through. So as far as ruining the relationship, you don't really have a relationship. He's not representing you in the transaction. So I don't think it's ruining the relationship. Is it a legit tactic? Yeah, it seems like a reasonable way to kind of like get them in a spot where there's an incentive for them to make it work and bridge the gap. So that seems reasonable to me if that's your strategy, but realize you do not have representation in that case. You are, probably at best transaction brokerage. If not, you are the customer and they're representing the seller.
Yeah, that seems reasonable. Next question, because I think this one will be.
Hold up too, and I also should say I am not an attorney, so and neither is Brian.
I'm not an attorney. I'm not a CPA. I'm not a financial advisor.
Correct.
I'm not a firefighter. I'm not a police officer.
All those are the
nothing.
same too. Brian is not a real estate agent. I am a real estate agent, so that's about
licensed.
the extent of my qualifications.
Yep. Okay. So next question. On getting your lender to provide a letter that matches your offer exactly instead of the max loan amount, one strategy we're aware of when the seller is way out on their asking price, for some reason we tend to buy properties that have stagnated but at a big discount, and the buyer knows there will be multiple rounds of negotiation if we are to be successful, is as follows. Hypothetical example. Okay. Suppose the property is listed at $200K, we're willing to spend $150, which we think is the likely final selling price, have approval to spend $300K as an example, and want to offer $100K and end at $130K would be a big victory for the buyers. We basically offer $100K with a lender letter stating we can buy up to $128.5. We don't show more than proof of funds than we would need for a 130K home. We gradually negotiate up to 128.5, maybe a little higher. Much as the seller shouldn't infer at the start that 128.5 is the buyer's limit, they will, or at least the seller broker will. What do you think of this strategy? It isn't lying any more than getting a lender letter for the offer amount, yet it is hoping that the seller will be misled into believing that the buyer can't pay more than the 130K, which isn't the case with the lender letter of the offer amount. So is it a legit strategy you would be willing to employ? One comment I want to have, because you're going to answer this, is my guess, is I do want to say it's like, I actually don't think you're trying to, I don't know. Would you say that negotiations are about misleading the other party, James?
No, they're trying to come to a meeting of the minds and find a win-win situation where it works for both parties.
Sure, but like in the book, Never Split the Difference, right? I mean, they're not misleading the other side. They're just negotiating for their side hard.
Sure. Yes.
And so I don't actually think that the use of the word, you're not really misleading the buyer into believing, or the seller into believing something. You're just negotiating your side.
Yeah, I think that's true. So I'll make a comment on this, and that is, in a hot market where this property is also being seen, and probably other buyers are right behind you or simultaneously approaching the property and trying to acquire it, this strategy will very likely not work unless it's way overpriced to begin with, and then your price probably seems reasonable. So I'll say that to begin with. If you're in a buyer's market, though, where you do have the negotiating power, the property has been sitting there, and you are doing this, I think that's reasonable. I think it's especially reasonable if the property has been sitting on the market for a long period of time and you are trying to find the price at which it does work for you, and that it could work for the seller in that particular case. And I don't think there's anything wrong with you saying as a buyer, this is the number that does work for me. I realize you've got it listed for 150. I'm not trying to offend you, but in order for me to make my numbers work, the number has to be, in your example here, 100 or whatever it was. I don't think that's an unreasonable stance. I think it's unreasonable in our current market environment at the lower price points. If you're looking at $1 million property, I think it's a very different market. And a property that's been sitting on the market and the seller's like, hey, bring me an offer. I'm motivated. I want to get this thing sold. That changes the dynamic considerably for me. So I would say it that way. Now, I will give you some insight as someone who has been on the seller side receiving offers that are low. I will tell you there are some personalities, some seller personalities, and the seller is the one that dictates this largely. It's not necessarily the agent, although the agent can sort of like put fuel on the fire or encourage them to feel the way that they are, or to encourage them to be a little bit more level-minded depending on the situation that's going there. But a lot of times the seller dictates what the actual reaction is, and in some cases they are buffering the seller's really nasty kind of comeback with a more reasonable, the seller declines to accept your offer. And that's the nice way of, the 30-minute talk that the agent got from the seller about how it was a ridiculous offer. And if that guy even comes in my house again, they look at their ring cam and they look at the picture and they're like, oh, I'm going to go find out where this guy lives, and, all sorts of just stupid stuff. Right. So having been on the side where the seller has received what they perceived, because it's all about their perception, where they perceive a ridiculously low offer in that particular case, they may actually stop negotiations. I've had this happen in more than one seller, where the seller's like, they're just not being reasonable. Let's not even reply to them. Let's not even say something. And in a market where the seller is in the driver's seat and they're getting showings, they're likely to get another offer, I think that's a reasonable stance. If my seller had the property on the market for 3 months and we had 2 showings and you come in low, I think I would encourage someone at that point, at least, let's see where this goes. Maybe it's not 100, but let's see where we can get them to. And you can always still say no. And so that's the long version of that answer. I don't know if you want to add anything to that, Brian, but that's sort of how I see it.
I don't think I have anything to add.
Okay.
Not right now, anyway.
Cool.
I'm going to skip the hot tub electrician discussion in that email.
Yeah.
You guys can have that. That's probably not direct.
Agreed.
And then I'm going to go to the other short one first. For my quick mental model of whether an investment should cash flow instead of the 1 or 2% rules, in this current low interest rate market is $400 plus 0.4% for monthly rent compared to home price, or for multifamily, $100 plus $300 per door plus 0.4%. This reflects that most costs have both a fixed and a proportional component. Obviously, still not perfect as it equates a small, cheap house in an expensive location to a large home in a cheap location. However, I do feel it is a quick fix that I can keep in my head for any time we run into CapEx and maintenance, killing the 1% rules for homes under 100K.
So I'll take this one. And what I'll say about it is sometimes you can come up with better fitting, just sort of like rules of thumb that seem to fit the data a lot better, and they may indicate that this was what makes a deal for me. And I think that's reasonable. I will tell you that to generalize that enough where you can pass it on to someone else and that they end up using it, I'm not sure that it's universally helpful in that way. You could say for this particular price range and my specific buying criteria, the types of houses I'm looking at and the way that I'm going to manage it and hold the property, that this rule is a really good fit for that. That totally makes sense to me. But to try to say that that is like a generalization that you should use, I'm not so sure that you should do that. I think that the real thing we want to teach people is please run your numbers like in a real spreadsheet. And you could definitely do some really rough things. I mean, I do rough things in the field all the time, but it never really is something we're making decisions on. It's more, you got to go home and actually run your spreadsheet and see those. So I don't know if you want to comment on that, Brian.
Yeah, I think I agree. Run the actual numbers, but a part of it is you just get a feel. Like, I didn't sit down and calculate hey, for multifamily in Evans, it's, $300 plus 0.296% of, the cost of the building, minus some other thing. Like, I don't think that is necessarily always helpful. I think that actually can mislead you more often than it's going to be right. And it may be right in a certain neighborhood for a certain set of buildings. But if you then take that model and apply it to something else, you may either overpay or you may miss a deal completely because it doesn't fit the model. And this is why we tell you to go run the numbers. So I think when you see enough properties, you end up having a model of, hey, I've seen 10 other properties that are like this, and they were all getting $995 in rent, and they all cost this much. And this one is getting $750 in rent and costs significantly less. Can I not bring rents up to $900 or $995 and therefore increase the value of the property? This seems like it's very different than all the rest. Why is it so different? And then go explore that and find that, hey, this is actually a deal.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing, but I was going to come at it from a slightly different angle. And I was going to say, you end up when you're out seeing things where you have run numbers to be able to compare something you ran numbers on recently. Like you looked at a deal, you're like, okay, I'm going to buy a $400,000 property. I'm getting $220 or $2,200 a month in rent. And the numbers were close on that. You could say, so if you got another one, you're like, hey, I think I can get 2,300 and it's the same price or $5K less. I think doing a quick adjustment on the fly would tell you this looks really interesting. I want to go really run my numbers. But for me, it tends to be a comparison of the actual deal to another actual deal I've seen. I don't know if that makes as much sense, but it's similar to what you just said there.
Perfect.
Cool.
You want to read his long question for my analysis to me?
Okay. Brian, on analysis of your costs, etc., from a month or so ago, and I think he's talking about your capital
arguably
expenses.
The best class, part 5.
And maintenance. Yeah, so arguably the best class of your part 5. Brian actually shared a whole bunch of data on his actual maintenance numbers for a portfolio of properties. And so if you have not seen that, you should go watch it. It's on the website. But it has been a few weeks since I listened to that one. But as I recall, you broke up your analysis between very old properties and fairly old properties with the hypothesis that old properties need more maintenance, between multifamily and single family under the hypothesis that this makes a difference.
Yeah, and of course, for clarity, it's not between very old properties and fairly old properties. It was literally like a cutoff of 1982 or something. And some of those properties are like, a couple years old. So it's a very big range.
There were new ones and non-new ones. And I think I tried to get him to pull out the brand new ones as much as possible because I think those were different.
I did some of that.
Yeah, you did. And I was going to, so there's more breakdown here, but okay, continuing on. And of course, in your portfolio, these concepts are highly correlated. However, I'm wondering if there's a different concept that is related to both of these, correlated in both in your portfolio, that may explain the data better. Okay. What if maintenance is considered as a fixed cost and some percentage of the rent instead of just percentage of the rent? And that's almost what we're talking about when we say that the maintenance on a property, when we buy these really low-end type properties, is a fixed dollar amount. It costs the same amount to replace carpet in a $50,000 property as it does in a $400,000 property.
Yeah, I mean, this is literally straight out of the CapEx silent killer class. Like, hey, doesn't matter if your house is 900 square feet or it's 1,800 square feet and it's a $100,000 or a $400,000 house, a furnace for that house still costs the same amount, roughly.
Yep.
Right. Servicing
Yep.
the furnace still costs $100.
And
Doesn't
so
matter how big the house is.
I think in many ways, and Andrew may have actually sent this email before the CapEx class. I don't remember when we received this, but so that is a refresher on that if it was. But yeah, we do think of it that way, but we didn't think of it that way when we were talking about the maintenance numbers, partially because the portfolio it's all in the same area geographically. And so there's a lot of commonalities there where you could probably fit it better with this to do that. So continuing on here, for example, is there a linear regression of rental price versus maintenance cost that doesn't pass through 0, that explains it better? And there probably is. If you tried to like fit that line, you could come up with a better fit, some type of y equals mx plus b sort of thing where you have the intercept, which is your base, and some other type of slope, which has, price or square footage or whatever increases, that it would fit better than that, better than just like a straight percentage. Yeah, that makes sense to me. But did we go do that? No. And I don't think Brian did any charting or tried to do a best fit curve. I think he just said, this is what the number was. So to me, this would make sense if we consider some maintenance examples. A water heater, furnace, or AC cost is close to a fixed cost. Yep, agreed. It's not related to land costs except your cost of living affecting plumbers' rates. Would agree with that. Increases only slightly on a larger home. Yep, we agree with that. A roof replacement is roughly proportional to roof size, not related to land costs unless the location expects a more expensive roof, even for a larger home, and the labor cost is not quite linear.
Yeah. I think you could essentially go and try and calculate out, hey, what do I have that is, regular occurring stuff that is a fixed cost and which is actually not a fixed cost. And I think what you're going to end up finding is that a lot of the stuff that you normally have to do, in a sense, is a fixed cost, which is exactly why we have a limit on the bottom end for CapEx of, hey, if it's not renting for, $625 or more in a multifamily unit in general, you should still go run the numbers. Probably your CapEx is going to kill you, right? And in a sense, your maintenance is going to kill you because you're talking about, AC and furnaces. This isn't just maintenance. That's technically CapEx, and go watch that class again. But it's really, a lot of the stuff is fixed, right? It's very difficult to actually think of something that really scales with the size of the property other than like, hey, if I have a 800 square foot apartment versus a 2,000 square foot house, my flooring cost is relative to the size of the floor. But, the paint is relative to the size of the house, but there's also just base costs in having a painter show up and have them, tape everything off and get ready and paint the house. So part of their bill is size of the house, and part of their bill is I'm showing up. So you could try and go do all of that. And I think what we do is we say, if you're buying lower end properties, be very careful that your percentage is actually enough in dollar amount to actually cover your expenses.
Yeah.
Because in many cases, it will not be.
You can't use the percentage we use here in a market that's very different priced housing. I think it's another way of kind of summarizing that too.
Yeah.
And I'm going to nip the one question here in the bud and say, because we're in a highly politically charged environment with an election coming up, I'm going to skip all questions that could in any way go political. And so, Andrew, I'm happy to discuss with you offline, but I don't think right now is the time to discuss the next question you had on there.
And other than telling people to wear a mask, we don't actually get political here.
Yeah, and I think that's a health and safety standpoint, in my opinion. It's not a political statement.
But
it's like
there are many people that would argue it is political.
I agree. I just don't want to get sick. That's what I'm saying.
Exactly. So sorry, Andrew. Your bottom questions are denied for now.
So I think we did
covered his email.
Wow, archived, done.
I know. I was like, dude, done.
All
right. So we are back up to 6:03 p.m. In the chat window, and we will start there. You want to read? I mean, I'm sure this one's for me.
It is. Here's the softball. So, Brian, can you please teach the entire 4-hour asset protection class in the next 5 minutes for me, please?
Absolutely.
That's essentially what this question is. So, from C.R. Hamilton, thoughts on LLCs? Yeah, I had a lot of thoughts on LLCs. From tax perspective, ? From risk reduction perspective, from loan perspective, from other perspectives. I'll take the loan one. It is really hard for you to get a loan in the name of an LLC. You need to do probably portfolio lenders in order to do that, which are usually adjustable rate mortgages, and they are usually not good long-term financing there. They've got some additional risk to them. So thanks, Brian.
So thoughts on LLCs from a tax perspective. So it really depends on what you're going to do, right? The normal attorney version very quickly is have a master LLC.
Hold on a second. Let me pause you for 1 second. There literally is 6 hours of this stuff in the separate class. So there's no possible way we could do this justice. So I want to tell people, if you really want to go to get the 6-hour version, go dig into that. But Brian's going to give you the 5-minute version.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the typical attorney will tell you something like this. Have a master LLC, which is hopefully not just you. It's you and someone else. And typically, if it's your spouse, you will not want to file. You will still want to file an informational return for that LLC. Otherwise, it treats it as a single member LLC. But then below your master LLC, you have a bunch of single member LLCs that then own properties based on kind of how much equity is in each property. So does it reduce your risk? It depends on what you define as risk, right? There's risk that you can offset by having a really good insurance policy. And there's a risk that you can offset by having a really good umbrella insurance policy and covering your liability. Because in a sense, you're really trying to prevent someone from, falling down the stairs and breaking their back and suing you for $5 million. That's what you're trying to avoid. If somebody does something and it's, in the $5,000, $10,000, $20,000 range, like your normal insurance policy, hopefully should cover that. You should check. But, your really asset protection is trying to have, you're out driving and you hit someone and kill them in a car and their family comes after you, all your stuff's on the line. And so you're really trying to prevent that from taking away your portfolio. And that's why asset protection is important. There's many ways to do asset protection. So it does help reduce the risk. Right? You're spreading out your equity into different LLCs. Depending on where you live, there's different ways to actually structure that. We use single member LLCs here. There are other methods to do that. Go talk to an attorney and find out what's best from your perspective and for your portfolio. I think the other thing that's important is that when you're just starting out and you're like, I'm going to go buy my first property, and you're like, oh, I don't have asset protection set up. In my personal opinion, I'm not an attorney, but it's okay. It's okay to have your first couple properties in your personal name, and then, because you probably don't have a lot of equity in those properties anyway. No, you can't interrupt my answer.
I'm going to interrupt that one part and say, if you have a lot of assets somewhere else, I'm not sure I would skip the attorney part, even for the first property or two. Now, how much is like a lot? That's up to you, but probably 6 figures plus.
Yeah, and you should have already taken care of that with asset protection before you got to real estate. So, True. Yes. From a loan perspective, so James said, it's really hard to get a loan in the name of LLC. It's actually not really hard if you're going to a portfolio lender, which he mentioned, but that part is the easy part. If you're trying to go buy a single-family home from Fannie Mae in an LLC, it's not going to happen. So I think it depends on where you are in your investing career. Right. And in some cases, what we found with our local portfolio lender is that having it in an LLC is actually beneficial because of some really weird banking rules they made up. And we're like, we even asked them, like, this doesn't really make sense. And they're like, yeah, we know, but that's just how it is. And we're like, okay, well, we're going to take advantage of it then. So go talk to your local bank and understand. But Fannie will let you do a loan in the name of a trust, which I also don't recommend you doing to get the loan. Because they will ask for they're already going to ask for a lot of information. They're going to ask for way more information. You're going to find it's not worth your time. Yeah.
I was going to have one more thing while we're on loan. We're not intentionally skipping over all the creative financing stuff where you're buying a property subject to and you're buying it in the name of an LLC to start with, where you're circumventing applying for the loan and all of those related things. We are aware of those and we're just not covering them. But that is additional strategy. If you're going to buy properties creatively and you're going to go off market and, acquire properties that way, sure, buy an LLC all day long.
Yep. And then from other perspectives, I mean, if you are going to have multiple master LLCs or you're partnering with other people, you should absolutely separate that from your own personal stuff for all sorts of reasons. But remember, every master LLC that needs to file a tax return or file an informational return is going to cost you money at tax time.
And time.
And time.
This
So
this has always been a trade-off of how much overhead do you want, how hard is it for you to operate and kind of keep track of all these things and manage them and do the things you're supposed to do in order to have them be in effect when you really need them, versus you operating nimbly and quickly and without a whole bunch of overhead and cost and time to do this correctly. So
Yep.
there's a whole discussion on that as well.
and that's a huge point of this particular question is it's how easy do you want your business to be to run? LLCs will make it slightly more complicated. If you have 20 checkbooks, right, because you have 20 properties and one's in every LLC, that's more difficult to manage than if everything was just in one account, right? And then following the rules of normal LLC operation and having an operating agreement, all those things are necessary. There are people in our town who own a lot of property who don't have any asset protection from an LLC perspective, right? They have asset protection from umbrella insurance, putting in their self-directed 401k and trying not to be jerks, essentially, right? Like if you're running a really like shady business and you're like pushing on your tenants and doing things that are like negligent, you probably need a lot of asset protection.
Yeah,
But
they're
in
not
most
doing.
cases, we don't recommend that. So
They're not doing repairs to the properties themselves. They've got a property manager in place so that they're not, risking having
Liable.
fair housing violations and all the stuff that's, involved in property management. So they're reducing their risk in other ways than using LLCs. And, there are people that believe that that's correct. Don't be fooled when you go to some type of seminar where they're trying to sell you the idea of getting LLCs and buying education on LLCs and hiring their attorneys that they recommend in order to have all your LLCs and stuff set up. It's a really easy fear-based sale for them to make by kind of getting you all worked up in that, and it may not be what you need. It may very well be what you need, but it may also not be what you need for your particular situation at that time. You may be better off using those resources and deploying them in another way before you get to that point. So
yep.
the best answer is talk to an attorney.
Yep, that is asset protection in like 7 minutes. It is a very complex topic, and it depends on what state you live in and where your LLCs are based, and a whole bunch of other stuff. So, please go talk to an attorney and a CPA, and have them talk to each other.
Yeah. And I'll say one other thing. If there's like one other like question around LLCs or asset protection that's very specific, it's not like, can you teach me about this, like this whole 15, 30-minute topic, definitely let us know. But otherwise, I'm going to recommend that you go dig into the 6 hours or whatever it is that we have on asset protection. Brian taught like a 2-hour class on like how people attack you from the top and the bottom and how to structure everything. And then there's like a whole separate one on like the paperwork and how that works and how those interact together.
Yep.
And I think there's another one in there for something. I just forget what it is, but there's a whole bunch of stuff in there.
3 hours long each.
Yeah. They're like crazy.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool.
So, next question. I definitely have an answer. I'm sure you do too. Thanks for tonight. I love the crap you're teaching. That's awesome. Me too. I hear contradictory opinions about the real estate market crashing in 2021. I live in Philly, and if there is a downturn here in Philly, where do you recommend I look for indications from my local real estate to see if that's going to happen? And so this answer for me is fairly straightforward. I think there are always factors that are well unknown outside of anything anyone could ever predict.
COVID.
But if you are looking at a couple different things, the main one being employment data, and looking at about a year to a year and a half out, when that starts to not look so good, although right now with COVID, you're going to look at that graph and go, well, I don't know how to interpret that. And I think we're all in that boat. But I think you've got that going on. I think you also have, if you can get a hold of migration data for how many people are moving in or out of your area, both kind of city-wise and state-wise, I think that is super useful. I think one of the other things that is also useful and telling is I've showed a chart several times that basically shows kind of where the brain power is moving from and to in the United States. And so if you're in one of the declining areas for that, like the bottom 10, you probably are not going to be in the best shape longer term.
I'm going to take an even bigger
Sure.
macro view of this whole thing and say, so why are you asking this question? Are you saying you're going to liquidate all the properties you've acquired up until the point when you're starting to see indicators that the market is going to decline? Then you're going to actually sell everything and move your money to a different market where you're going to have to try to time that one's at the beginning of an upward peak of doing stuff? Is that what I'm sort of like reading between the lines about what you're doing? Because if that's the case, I think that's a really bad idea. I think that you should try to find a market that you think has really good long-term prospects. I think that you should look at the long-term horizon instead of the short-term or intermediate horizon, because we've showed, like, there's so many quotes and there's so much data on this about trying to time the market and, trying to come in and find a market that is, going to do well for 3 or 4 or 5 years and then get out. There's a whole website that they try to sell this like market timing. If you had bought into this market, held for 3 years, then sold, and then went to this other market and held for 3 years and do this, it's super sexy sounding, as if you could go tell. And all they're really doing is, I think they're looking at the first derivative of the appreciation rate. So they're looking at the rate of change of the appreciation rate over time, and they're trying to see when it actually starts curving to this number, then that's when you get out and you do this other thing and you do the other thing there. So I do not recommend that you do that type of strategy. If you are trying to do that, you'll notice there's a really good quote. This must have been a class I taught. I'll look it up when Brian answers the rest of the question. But it was a class I taught where I had a whole bunch of quotes from like really successful financial people, and they pointed out that there are no market timing people on like the Forbes 500 list. Yep. There's no actual example, and they said something crazy like, I don't know anyone who consistently makes money trying to time the market, nor do I know anyone who knows someone who consistently made money trying to time the market. So to try to time the market, sort of like a fool's game, you'll notice some of the richest people in the world, they are long-term buy and hold. I mean, Warren Buffett talks about having a punch card where you have 20 investments you can make in your lifetime, and as you make the investments, you click off the punch card and one is down, and that's it. You're not getting any more than that. You're not trying to get in and out and trade stuff and try to do that. So maybe you want to maybe you've got a system where you can, do better than Warren Buffett. I'm not so sure I want to go head to head against Warren Buffett in investing strategy. So Brian, if you want to add something to that, I'll look up what class that was.
Sure. I mean, I think, backing up a little bit even further is, are you worried that if the market in Philly like crashes, you're suddenly going to lose your money? And if you're buying for the short term, then yes, I don't recommend buying for the short term. I think, one of the conversations James and I have had a lot is, and a lot of people are like, well, what if the price of the house goes down from $350,000 to $300,000 or $250,000? And I'm like, well, my goal when I bought the houses was to get cash flow. So I don't really care because I'm going to have these properties 30 years from now. And so there's not been really a point in time in U.S. history where the market in real estate has gone down in almost every city beyond 15 years. So basically, if you wait long enough, you should be okay. So, and if it does go down, if you already own a bunch of stuff, you probably bought it over time. And if you don't own a bunch of stuff and you buy one today and then the market dumps, guess what? That's an opportunity. You buy some more and cost average yourself in. Either way, I think you're fine.
So I'm going to answer your question directly, Sabrina, and I'm going to give you 2 leading indicators of this stuff. Brian's indicator is more of a demographic, kind of like where the smart people are moving to, and that's the one where the intelligent people are moving to an area.
My first 2 are employment data and migration.
And population migration. So here's the other ones from a real estate standpoint. Months of inventory. Months of inventory takes into account both supply and demand, the number of houses that are for sale and the number of houses that have been selling. It uses both those numbers in order to determine how many months it would take to sell through the current properties that are on the market. And watching that change could be a leading indicator of stuff. Days on market is also another one. And then also discount from list price, or premium over list price if you're in a really hot market. So those are probably the 3 that I would suggest you look at as kind of like additional real estate-based indicators for doing stuff. And then I did find the class, oddly enough, it's called Should I Wait for a Real Estate Dip to Invest in Real Estate? And that whole class is about like, our market's frothy. Should we wait for the market to start declining and then buy stuff at discounts, which is sort of the question you're asking, just a different angle on the whole thing. So All right. I think we're good on that one.
Cool. Next question. Is it worth buying non-conforming basement bedrooms and egressing the window and bringing it up to code? I think the answer to that is if it makes sense and gives you a bedroom that is totally usable and that improves the value of the property, then absolutely yes.
Yeah, and I think in a lot of cases that is true. One thing you do need to be aware of, though, is looking at comparable sales and finding out what a basement bedroom is worth. They're not the same. Basement square footage is not usually the same value as above grade square footage, and so you really do need to look at that a lot closer. And what we've seen by looking at data here in Northern Colorado is that it is usually more expensive to finish the basement than the extra value you add. Now, there are exceptions to that, but that is the general rule of thumb. The cost for you to go and finish a basement square footage, you usually don't get the extra value in appraised value. But you might also get income, and income may be enough to do. And just another side note about basement bedrooms, if you're not aware, parents do not like their sub-teenage kids living in basement bedrooms. Once they turn like 13 and get feisty and they, are pushing back against parenting and stuff like that, they love basement bedrooms for their kids. But sub 13, you don't find a lot of parents liking those. So realize if that's your demographic for who you think the house is probably going to fit best, not that you can cherry pick for fair housing rules, but if you thought that was the type of client you were going to attract with that house, take that into account.
Yep. And then Sabrina asks, will the occupancy and prices of small multi-units be affected too during a real estate market downturn? So in general, everything will be affected in some way, right? There's nothing that's immune to a real estate market downturn. And it totally depends on how the downturn plays out, right? If it's a large chunk of unemployment that causes the downturn and people are moving out of the city, then it could be that, normal single family homes are the ones that are going vacant, but the people that still have jobs kind of at the lower end may still be living in apartments. But then the problem becomes, well, the single family home rent has dropped. So they go, oh, I can go live in a single family home now. And they move out of the smaller multifamily. So it doesn't really matter what the downturn is. People are going to move around and everything is going to be affected. And so how well you are advertising your property, how well you are managing your property, how well you're taking care of your property, and how quick you are to respond to, oh, hey, in order to keep my tenant, I need to not raise rent. And in some cases, I may even need to drop rent to keep them here because they're great tenants. I think that's what you need to watch out for.
I concur.
Sweet. And then Vojta, who apparently figured out how to change the name because now it's much closer than it was before where it looked like Vojtech. And I was like, I don't know how to say that. And I asked him last week. So Vojta's name actually looks pronounceable to me now. What advantage brings using credit union as a lender as opposed to a regular lender?
There is zero advantage to whether it's a credit union or a bank or a mortgage broker as long as they can perform. So I think it's not a question of credit union versus other type of lender. It is, do both parties feel as though that lender is actually going to show up at closing with money in order to close the deal? That is the confidence thing.
And I will think, I will add that there may be an advantage in your personal dealings with them. They may give you a higher amount of attention because you're not just another number to them. Whereas if you go to a large bank whose name I almost said, and I've avoided, right? If you go to one of the really big banks, unless you have a ton of money and have a really special relationship, you're just another person to them. In a credit
even
union,
then,
yeah, I mean, even
if you have enough money, sure,
yeah, but but if you go to a bank that's like I bank here locally at First Bank, and I can literally send an email, get an account opened, and do it all over email because they know who I am. Right. And so those things have benefits. And the longer you're with smaller banks, in some cases, the more benefits you will get when you go to try and do a loan or you need a line of credit or, hey, you've been a customer here and you've got a lot of money in our bank.
for specific types of loans like
Yes.
portfolio loans, not for conventional financing. The rules for the conventional financing are
Are the
static
same for
across.
everybody.
Yes, they're static across. Although they can
Yeah.
have additional overlays and make it more strict, but as far as like, being able to bend the rules for you, that is
Yeah.
not happening.
Yeah. It's like in another life, you should have been a teacher.
I didn't put
If
my
you
finger
give me
on
the
you.
finger one more time tonight,
I wanted to
I'm going
tell
to give
you.
you the finger.
I wanted you to know you should pause your thought when you get to a good breaking point, but I don't want to interrupt you all the time either.
Yeah, well, this is just wait till I'm done talking. It's not like we're going anywhere.
All right. I may have to write my notes down, otherwise I'll forget.
This helps him remember his notes.
Well,
People.
it's quick.
Just raise your hand.
It is quicker. Maybe I should type it in chat.
Oh, that's awesome. Okay. Next question. In your experience, do purchased cash buyers lists yield results for wholesalers?
I've never used them. I will tell you, if you want a list of actual buyers who are buying actual deals that you're trying to wholesale, what you do is you go to the public records, go to your title company, and you get a list of people that have bought properties like the ones you're trying to sell as absentee owners. So you get a list of, let's say you're wholesaling in a certain neighborhood that's got, a high yield of where you're seeing a lot of your deals come in. Well, you can go to the title company and say, I want all of the people that bought in the last 2 years as an absentee owner where the tax bill is sent to an address other than the property address. Those are investors. And if they bought something and resold it within a very short period of time, those are probably flippers. And so you can get a list of the people that have actually done deals, legitimate, bona fide deal closing people, which is better than any buyer's list I know of. And you can go and use that list to do it. And it might be a small list, might be a big list, depending on how big of an area and how many people you're doing. But that's the best list you got, and it's cheap because most title companies will give you that list for like 10 cents a name.
Yep. The only thing I would add to that is, what James said is dead on. Like, find people that are actually buying it. Go to your real estate, when we used to have in-person meetings for things, go to your real estate local group like ours here in Fort Collins and Loveland and Northern Colorado. Like, go to our group and actually, who's actually buying stuff, because that is a huge win. And are you still looking to buy stuff, right? You can have a personal conversation.
All right. So I have my finger up. I was trying to tell you I had something to add to this.
Yeah.
You
must have been a terrible student in middle school, because you're just like, the teacher starts talking and you're like,
I was like the know-it-all. I just had my hand up the whole time.
Yeah.
The teacher would call me like, "Yes, James." I'd be like, "Yes." Then I'd teach the next part of the lesson. Hey, so in all seriousness, this is the problem I've experienced with what you're trying to talk about of going to the local meeting is, especially if you're new and your BS detection is not quite on.
Sure.
It is really hard to tell the difference between someone who talks a good game and someone who's a bona fide buyer, because some of the best repeat bona fide buyers I know, they're not really loud and obnoxious and talking and one saying, "Hey, I'm doing all these deals" and stuff like that.
You only know one of those.
Yeah, that's you. They're really quiet. They're really quiet and reserved, and they're just quietly doing, a few deals a month, just making money. So really, the way to find the true ones is to go to the title company and get the people that are buying stuff.
To be clear, I'm not saying that you're going to walk up to people. I actually think the better way to do it at that meeting is, hey, is there anybody in there? You ask a bunch of people the following question. Hey, is there anybody in the room that you know that's buying a lot lately? And then you see, hey, everybody said that, Nick Cunningham, he's buying everything under the sun right now, And
he is buying everything.
I don't know. I have no idea what his actual. That's why I picked him, right? It's like, and then you are like, oh, you can then approach Nick and be like, hey, Nick, like, I'm a wholesaler. I have some deals. Are you interested? And you can feel it out that way. But yes, It's really hard because you could run into someone like me where you ask, hey, how many deals have you bought in the last year? And I'm like, pound sand, get out of my face. And then you go ask someone else and they're like, oh, I buy deals all the time. And they haven't bought anything in 10 years. Yep. Right. And really, you've missed the connection. You should have sent your deal to me, but you sent it to them and they didn't buy it. And I wish I would have bought it.
And here's the other challenge: is like our culture in our local real estate investor
Right.
group is to we find it obnoxious, we find it rude and presumptuous for you to go and ask someone how much money they make. So if I went up to Brian, I said, Brian, how much money do you make each year? I think it's completely acceptable for him to punch you in the kidney and tell you, I'm not going to tell you that. And so the extension of that is, well, then how many doors do you own? Because if you figure, hey, I make X number of dollars per door, you can figure out how much money he makes, or how many properties are you flipping? And I know I make $30,000 per flip, or $20,000 per flip, or $50,000, or whatever your number is, and you count up the number of things. I think that it's actually a little obnoxious to go and ask somebody how much money they're making, and so it's hard for you to do that in public, but it's actually on public record how many deals people do, and so you can go and pull that data and find out. And I'd rather have a quality, smaller list, people that I know are bona fide buyers, than this list of a whole bunch of tire kickers, because then I got to deal with tire kickers. I got to meet someone at the property who's not serious. Maybe they're trying to wholesale it to someone else, or maybe it's their uncle who really wants to get involved in real estate investing, and they told him, go to the meeting and I'll split the deal with you, or I'll pay your bird dog fee, or whatever it is. You don't want to deal with that. You want to deal with the person who's actually closing on the deals. And so I think you get the buyers list from title companies.
And I think as an example to that, I think, just real life story, if your buyers aren't moving very quickly. So someone recently I don't even know when it was. It must've been last year. My time has become, I don't remember when this was.
Pre-COVID or post-COVID?
Yeah, it was pre-COVID.
Oh, there you go.
So, pre-COVID, someone brought a deal to NCRAG, mentioned it. I talked to them, and they sent me the information. I sent them back what I thought, because they were just asking questions about the deal at first. And then they bowed out and said, this is too much for my first deal. And I said, great, can I go talk to them? And they were like, yeah. And I said, great, give me 24 hours and I will have an answer for you one way or the other. And I needed to go talk to the person that was selling the home. And so I did that. And then I bought the house. Right. And so it wasn't hey, I don't know, I'm going to hem and haw for a week and like totally mess up your timing. If people aren't acting quickly and they can't make a decision like, yeah, this is a house I want to buy, I just need to negotiate the deal, then move on, right? Those are not true buyers in my opinion, right? True buyers are ready with money. They're ready. They're able to actually execute and get it done. And to your comment on a smaller list is better, and I know you've said this, but I truly believe this. If you had, 2 or 3 people that were buying properties on your list, that is all you need. You do not need a buyer's list of 50 people. That's stupid.
That's true. And let me give you some perspective where I'm coming from. So there was a period of time.
Give it to me or everyone?
I'll give it to everybody.
Okay, good.
There was a period of time when I ran the largest national wholesaling company in the U.S. We were in, oh man, how many?
226 markets.
226, is that the right number? 280 markets.
Yeah,
I don't even remember anymore. It was a long time ago, but we were in that many markets, and I will tell you, the Pareto principle was alive and well. There were like a very small number of hyperactive buyers in every market, and there was a huge amount of dead weight. 90+% of the people on my buyers list rarely even opened the emails or like looked at the deal or anything like that. And so eventually you get to the point where you've got 1 or 2 hyper buyers that take everything you have. You don't even send it out in the email list because you don't want to have to deal with like telling people it's already gone or, trying to explain to them what's happening. You're just waiting for your 1 or 2 people to like actually say, I want it or I don't want it. And so that's what ends up happening. So just be aware of that.
Yep. All right. We've killed that question. Next question. Analyzing deals. Should a multifamily home or property have better cash on cash flow, or other indicator than an equivalent single family home, maybe because 4 units are more difficult to maintain than a single family home or because of other reasons? Or should a single family home and a multifamily home with the same ROI/cash flow considered as equally a good or a bad deal? Let me just load that cannon question.
I know. I'm ready to go. I'm gonna let you go first, though.
You go ahead. Oh my gosh, that is like you just put a cannonball in a cannon, and it's a really hard question. And James and I probably have slightly differing opinions.
Yeah, and so I'll say this. In my opinion, what I've experienced is that there are some multifamily deals that are better. There are some single family deals that are better. But as a general rule, I have found that the single family home deals are probably better than the multifamily numbers, at least when you acquire it. There may be periods of time after you bought the property, raise rents, improve the things where the numbers could be better doing that. But the challenge is most of the time for the multifamily stuff, your down payment's larger. The type of loan you have is going to be different. It's going to have a different amortization schedule. You're going to have a higher interest rate. Your maintenance on your properties tends to be a little bit higher, especially since you're going to have common area stuff that you're doing on a lot of these things. So for all of those reasons, and that the financing isn't amazing, it's not 30-year fixed rate, long-term, can't vary on you type financing, I find personally that a lot of the multifamily stuff is not as good as the single family homes. But Brian, go ahead.
And I think in general, what James said is close to what I think is real. But I think if multifamily deals were so much worse than single family deals, no one would buy them because there would not be a drove of people that are like, oh, I only invest in multifamily.
Yeah, there are advantages of buying multifamily. You get to do one loan, you acquire 100 units, you get to add it to your portfolio. A lot of times you can move this money in chunks, but if you need liquidity, sometimes it's hard to move that 100 units, especially during a softening market or something like that, where single family homes, it's harder to sell 100 individual single family homes, but it's selling it to owner occupants or investors, and investors only make up a smaller percentage of the market. So there's pros and cons to all of these things, but from a numbers perspective.
Yeah, I do think, Voice is asking kind of 1 unit versus 4 units. So I'm going to throw for a minute your loan, example out the window and say, hey, a single family home versus a 4 unit. I have both from the exact same time period and they both do really well. And so this is, part of it is understanding when you buy a 4 unit, right? The 4 unit that I'm thinking of, the one thing that I wish was different is that every unit has its own little boiler and its own water heater, which sucks. If it was just one boiler for the whole unit, that would be great, or for the whole building. So I think but those things long-term, I don't know that they really, really matter, right? If you're holding this for 30 years and you're taking good care of the property, I think either way, buying a 1 unit, a 2 unit, a 3 unit, a 4 unit, I think you're going to be just fine.
Totally.
And I also want to comment that buying a 100 unit building is vastly different than buying small multifamily.
I totally
8 unit,
agree.
10 unit, 12 unit, 25 unit. Buying a 100 unit building is I'm actually running a business, not just owning real estate. I actually have an on-site manager, an on-site maintenance tech, right? Because I'm getting a call from one of my 100 units all the time, or there's outdoor maintenance to do. So it's a very different situation where you've got a 12 unit building, a property manager can handle it. You've got 100 or 1,000 unit complex, you're running a business too.
Yeah. And there's probably 3 groups. There's the sub 5 units. There's probably 5 to 25, 30, somewhere in there. So a little bit more than that starts getting a little bit more challenging. And then there's the 30 plus units. That's probably a different beast altogether.
Yeah. So Hunter replies from earlier. Good call on this question, I assume. So just so you guys know, if you guys are typing comments to the questions we're answering now, I am 34 messages behind. So I am not reading your comments on the questions that we're answering right now until I get there.
We're at 6:12. The questions we're answering.
Yeah. So we got an hour to make up. So let's see if we can pound through a couple of these pretty quick.
Okay.
A related question: if you have a single family home and a condo townhome with significant HOA fees, which has the same indicators, ROI, would you prefer the single family home or the condo townhome? That's an easy one. I'm going to answer for James too. We would both take the single family home because the HOA is probably going up year over year over year, and I have condo and it eats into my profit pretty bad. Now James is going to tell me he doesn't agree.
No, I think I largely agree. I wouldn't automatically exclude the condo or townhome. They would be close for me, but I think I would prefer to have control over my destiny and set my numbers for the maintenance that gets done or doesn't get done. I'd like to be able to choose and shop that. And I think HOAs, sometimes they're in conflict with my desire as an investor owner. They may have largely owner-occupant owners and have a different philosophy on how they handle maintenance and things, and that could actually make it more expensive. So it's not an automatic no, but it's probably a 60-40 in favor of single-family homes for me.
Yep. Does Brian's spreadsheet support FHA loans? Yes, absolutely. Specifically, does it support PMI not going away, never after 11 years based on FHA rules? It actually has the PMI disappearing after you hit 78%. It does not actually continue that for FHA loans.
Oh, so it doesn't actually support FHA. That's super interesting.
So I need a checkbox. Okay.
Yeah. A checkbox or the loan to value that it goes away, and you could put 0.
Yep.
We'll make that update. Look for it tomorrow. It won't be tomorrow. We'll be lucky if we get it by Q1.
Yeah, because you said that, chances are high that I like go do it at 1 a.m. tonight just to be like, hey, here you go, people. Like,
this is
I
like
did
the
it.
dare. This is
No.
like I dare you to go make the change to your spreadsheet before tomorrow, Brian.
Yeah, no.
Oh,
You know what?
that's awesome.
You actually know how to use spreadsheets, so
I
you can
do.
make that change.
You know, I won't touch your spreadsheet, but Brian has been remarkably generous with his time. He's not paid. He's not compensated for coming on and answering all these questions, nor is he compensated for his spreadsheet that he maintains and provides and updates for everybody and gives it away on my website. So, yeah, thank you for doing that, Brian. Now that I forced him to do it, like it's like a 24-hour turnaround time on spreadsheet coding. Oh, that's pretty awesome.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, you can go just stick in like an other expense and plug it in, and you're close enough, right? I mean, really not a huge deal. So you could make it look the same. Just put PMI as 0 and then put an other expense as what your PMI is, and you're done. So yes,
That's how we used to do it.
Yeah, the spreadsheet really can accommodate it. You just have to understand that you don't put PMI on the left upper side.
That's
so
true.
The chances that I update that are pretty low, but I'll do it at some point.
Yeah.
In fact, I will write it down.
Oh, now I know it's getting done. When Brian writes it down, this is like a goal setting tip. This is the underlaying of the class behind the class. Like this is like learning how to set goals and get things done. If Brian writes something down, that's as good as done.
Yep. So the mayor of Wellington would like to know, what do you think about abolishing 1031 exchanges from the tax code?
I love it.
Yeah. So this is a loaded question as well, and I'm going to avoid any politics with it. But this is the same as, what do you think about Roth IRAs no longer being able to actually withdraw without having to pay taxes? The government could change any of these things at any time. What do you think about not being able to depreciate the value of your rental property on your taxes? All of these things could change. And it's a business. And so honestly, like 1031 exchanges, like from my personal perspective, and I've done a lot of investing, right? And I've done quite a few 1031 exchanges. And would it have sucked if I wouldn't have been able to do those? Absolutely. But at the same time, would it have like stopped my business? Absolutely not. Not a chance, right? I'm just paying the taxes that I owe. And
Yeah, there
I'm
could have
okay with
been,
that.
we could make up a new fictitious rule that says you don't ever pay taxes on any cash flow you have in properties, or when you sell properties, you don't have any taxes. But if that never existed, you wouldn't feel bad that it went away, only because we have this 1031. And you're talking about, well, what if it goes away? Will you feel bad about it? Yeah, but if you didn't have it to begin with, it wouldn't have mattered.
Yeah.
Let it
So
go.
also, by the way, Mitch, you are violating our rule. You are sending to all panelists instead of all panelists and attendees. So I'm going to rename you
and
to the mayor.
we have to be super careful that the actual mayor of Wellington
Oh,
doesn't
that would
come
be
and,
awesome.
and like say, hey, you
actual
can't
mayor
use
would-
that. You are not allowed to use my title in a thing because it confuses people.
Hey, have you trademarked that?
No, I have not.
Maybe we should.
The mayor
right.
of Wellington? I'm pretty
Yes.
sure there is a mayor of Wellington, isn't there?
But it's not trademarked, I bet. Yeah. All right. Voita says, should we be writing to all panelists or attendees right after Mitch violates the rule? So
So
yes,
does
you should be
Voita.
sending to all panelists and attendees.
So does
And
Voita.
then Mitch sends to all panelists, does Brian have a full-time job?
Yes, real estate.
Like, what is that question designed to actually to get to. I'm
This is
curious.
like, hey, Brian, how much money do you make?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I have lots of full-time jobs.
Are you looking for a reason that, like, an excuse as to why you're not doing stuff? Because, Brian doesn't have a full-time job, but I have to work a full-time job, and that's why I can't be an investor like Brian. Or Brian has a job where he makes a lot of money, so that's why I can't be successful investing in real estate, is because Brian makes so much money at his job that obviously he can. I mean, everyone can be successful if they made $1 gazillion a year. I mean, which way are you going with this?
Yeah, and so I'm just going to be a jerk for 1 minute, because why not?
Why not?
You know, like I think this has come up in the class, right? Like if you actually wanted to put a Dara, I think the thing that I unknowingly said that will now lead to this point is, hey, I will update the spreadsheet tonight at 1 a.m., right? Because
yes, full-time job, updating spreadsheets for free.
No, it's literally that I am willing to outwork everyone else in the room.
That's true.
At any given time, just to win. And
there's a story about this, like the step thing we did over the weekend.
Yeah, James literally was he went out and 8 to 10 o'clock at night and walked a bunch of extra miles, 4 miles, because we were having a 1-day step challenge on Fitbit.
Yeah.
And he was he called me. I was inside. I was watching TV. And I hadn't really looked at the challenge because I was way ahead before he walked his extra 4 miles.
That's right.
And at 10:50, I looked and I was like, oh yeah. And I literally went outside and ran around my neighborhood for 70 minutes.
And then iced off. He went into his bath and iced himself off. That's how much pain he was in.
Yeah, that was a different challenge. But yes. So yeah, I think, I'm not sure what you're getting at, and you can type 40 messages below or we can actually understand what your intent is and we'll come back to it. But yeah, I mean, this isn't about whether you have a full-time job. I mean, Royce has a full-time job. He can be a successful investor. I don't know what the point is, but we're going to move on.
Yeah.
Andrew says, I wasn't expecting you to answer that question. Well, too bad. That's what we do. Somebody says, I can't read their name. So Duncan says, I'm new to NCraig, so maybe everyone else is familiar with James and Brian's antics, but I'm getting a definite car talk vibe.
Is that a compliment or is that
it's a compliment?
Okay, good.
I'm not a car guy, but Car Talk's a pretty big show.
Okay, well, that's good. Thank you.
Let's see. Boom, boom, boom. Ty. Oh, Ty has a question. Man, we were catching up for a little while. There's 41 new messages right now, and we're at
it's all the mayor.
Yeah, I'm sure. He's like, you're a jerk, and then he's log off, and we won't even be able to talk to him. So Ty says, has anyone ever had a neighbor to a rental that continually run tenants out, even when a property management company is running it?
Yes.
Well, I've had the neighbor that bothered the other neighbors. Go have a conversation with them, man, person to person. Man to man, man to woman, woman to woman, woman to man, whatever it is, go have a conversation.
I was going to say baseball player. It's a baseball player.
Yeah, I should probably add gender neutral to whatever it is. I don't care. But go have a conversation, because I've had 2 tenants that have had problems with their neighbors where their neighbors have gotten in touch with me. And both times my first response was, the tenant needs to go talk to the neighbor. And in one situation, that flat out resolved it. In the other situation, there was a substance abuse issue kind of going on. And so I had to resolve it with a stern conversation with my tenant.
I'll add one other thing, and that is my Stoicism reading today is exactly about this. It is about going and talking to the people that you've got a problem with directly.
Voita says, analyzing deals, is there a rule of thumb? Hey, we have a whole class on rules of thumbs. It's the rule of 72, the rule of 69, the rule of 1, the rule of 2, the rule of 50, the rule of 33. There's a whole bunch of rules. Should we use 3% annual increase ratio? I assume you mean appreciation. Or are older properties likely to have how to model increasing HOA fees over time? 3%. This is the problem with HOAs. So the HOA could be really poorly run, and you could be paying $100 a year now or $100 a month, and then they look at it and they go, oh, we just had our 50-year study done, and we are actually going to be negative $3 million, so we actually need to raise it from $100 a month to $300 a month. This is the problem with what an HOA has the power to do. Yeah. So you can model it, but I can tell you my HOA dues on a property have gone up from under $200 to almost $300 a year in 8 years. So that's not 3%. That's like 7%.
But in general, I think you model this at you can make two cases. You can do, because I think about this stuff a lot. You can make the case that you want to use whatever the inflation rate is to say, okay, HOA is going to keep pace with inflation, or you could say, HOAs are going to increase faster than inflation. And so I'm going to use inflation plus some metric. And I don't think it's unreasonable to use 3%, kind of what you suggested there. Although what Brian said is completely valid, because you could have one that is totally underfunded and they could increase it by 200% in 1 year. But then after that, it's probably a 3%-ish rule for that period on.
Yeah, but I mean, the other issue is you could get hit with a special assessment for 10 grand.
Yeah, you could also get insurance to cover special assessments. But yes, you could get hit with a special assessment.
Yeah, so one tip. This is probably this is like worth watching. If you own a condo, worth watching the entire 2 hours or 3 hours of questions. You need to call and make sure that your insurance policy actually has the ability to cover if your condo or your HOA association has an insurance claim. Their deductible, they're going to pass on to you. And I just had this happen with hail damage, and it was like $3,500. Called my insurance company like years before that to make sure I had that rider. And they were like, yep. I called them up. I said, hey, this is the bill and the invoice from the HOA. Shows that I owe $3,500 for their deductible for the hail claim. And 24 hours later, the money was in my account and the claim was closed. So didn't have to pay a deductible on it at all. So make sure that's on your policy. Call your insurance company and go from there. Next question, Sabrina basically says, I'm new. I just applied for HELOC to use to buy my first property. I'm concerned that if I buy when the market's going to drop, won't it be easier to get cash flow if I wait to buy? And then, yes, we've already answered that question, she says. So, yep, exactly that. Voita says, would it make sense to specialize yourself only to single-family home or only to condos or townhomes, become an expert on that domain and disregard the other? Not really. I mean, a single-family home and a condo are very similar. The only difference is the HOA is taking care of everything studs out. You're responsible for everything studs in. So I don't know that there's a benefit to actually doing that. I think what is more beneficial is becoming an expert in investing. Don't become an expert in single-family homes. Don't become an expert in condos. Don't become an expert in multifamily. Become an expert in the art of investing. Like, understand how to analyze a deal, regardless of whether it's 100 units or 1 unit or half a unit, right? It doesn't matter. Understand how to partner with people. Understand how to get the deals done. I think that is more important. James, you are so fast. That's what the comment says, just so you know. Please repeat about the title company. No idea what that's in reference to.
Where is this?
It's from Duncan. It just says, James, so fast. Please repeat about the title company. Remember, we're not reading your comments as we go. We're going through them in order. So if you remember what that is, otherwise this will be recorded. You can go back and listen to it. So that's the easy way to get that done. Nick says,
I know what he's talking about, the title company. He's talking about getting the list of cash buyers from the title company. And you need to go down to the title company and tell them you want a list of buyers that have bought in the last year or 2 years or whatever period of time was. And you could tell them you want people that did not get loans, say you want cash buyer. And you're going to have to find the right person who knows what you're talking about, because if you just ask anyone at the front desk, there are not a lot of people requesting these and they won't know what you're talking about. But if you find the right veteran kind of like title rep person who understands this and been in the business long enough, you can get them to give you a list. You have to pay for it, but it's cheap. You can get a list of people that have bought properties in a certain geographical area.
Yeah. So I'm now doing a web search from the name Nope, Not Gonna Happen. That is, let me Google that for you. What is Brian Williams' net worth 2020?
Oh, what is his net worth?
It doesn't come up with crap. So good luck. You're probably going to be looking at Brian Williams from MSNBC, who was on the news, blah, blah, blah. Moving on. Thanks. I am assuming that's Jason or Royce. Do you have to pay for the list from the title companies? Yes. About 10 cents per name.
It could be more than that now. It's been a while since I got this list, but whatever it is, it doesn't matter. If you're going to pay $100 to get your list, you're going to get the list for $100. It's going to be an asset of your business that you're going to want for a while.
Right. And props to Robert. He heard us like razzing the people for only sending to panelists, and he immediately retyped his question. So well done.
Good job. That's good. That's good.
Can we talk? Mitch is still typing to all panelists. Can we talk about Boston? Nope. Skylar says, what are your thoughts on investing into apartment complexes?
I love it.
Stop.
What?
So This is the man. I'm gonna probably diss on apartment complexes, especially
What?
if you're a new investor. So
What? Hold on a second. You can't say that because we had a talk. This probably was 4 or 5 years ago now about like if you have certain size goals, then going and doing single family homes might actually be like anti toward achieving your goals, and that you should start doing apartments from the very beginning. Have you changed your tune on that?
this is what happens when you like interrupt me before I say
Oh, I'm
anything and
sorry.
try
Go
to
ahead.
guess what I'm going to
I,
say, and then you're going to
I,
agree with everything I say now. It's going to
I
be
take it
awesome.
back. I take it back. You know, I'm not the type that would just agree with you for just being agreeable.
Yeah, right. You're going to disagree with everything I say tonight, which makes it interesting. So, so I think investing in apartment complexes is a fine thing if you know what you're doing. If you don't know what you're doing and someone comes to you and says, hey, we're going to go buy a 100-unit building. Do you want to buy 33% of it? You know, this is what the return is going to look like. And you look at it and it's like, oh, man, that's amazing. Let me tell you how that's going to not work out for you. It's not going to work out at all for you, probably. And here's an example. So here's a mistake I made, and it's probably the smartest. I mean, James is one of the smartest people I know, but like, there's literally one person who is like literally the smartest person I've probably met on the planet. And he fell for something very similar. Like, I invested some money into a private placement memorandum that looked great on paper, buying some land at like pennies on the dollar. And all they need to do is go and like build some homes and sell some commercial lots. Looked amazing. I've gotten half of my capital back, like, I don't even know, 6 years later. And it was supposed to be like a 20% on paper return. Easy. Like, shouldn't have been a problem. Turns out, and I interviewed the people. I like went and talked to the like person that's running the PPM, the person that was going to do all the building and construction. He'd been in business, and I asked about his old deals and went and did research. Everything looked amazing. I haven't made a damn thing. In fact, right now I'm down 50% of my principal, earning nothing. So,
and it was supposed to be short. It was supposed to be like a quick 2
like
year,
2 or 3 years.
Yeah,
done. So I think unless you really understand what's going on in apartment complexes and you've been around them, like, if you're putting any more than 5 or 10% of your overall net worth, which should already probably be in the six figures before you even touch this, right? Like, it's probably not something you want to do. So, you know, they're good, but it depends on what you mean by apartment complexes too. If you're talking an 8-unit apartment complex, go for it. I'm a much different opinion. If it's a 100-unit or 1,000-unit and you're investing with someone else where you have very little control, do extra due diligence.
And what's hard about the due diligence is you don't know what you don't know. And, you know, you could think that's normal the way that they're describing this, or this is exceptional when it's just crap. I mean, so it's hard to say.
So the next link is that my annual salary is $10 million a year.
Sounds about right. That sounds about right, actually.
Yeah, that was an article from March 25th, 2016, before like
the helicopter stories.
Yeah. All right. That is not me. Let's see. Question to Brian and James: as experienced real estate investors, did COVID-19 outbreak change which properties are you choosing to your portfolio? If so, how did your criteria change? Not taking into account proximity of public transport, preferring detached houses over multifamily. Didn't really change anything for me. I think about reserves as the only change.
Yeah, if I was investing in student housing, which I wasn't,
yes,
I probably would have changed that.
Yes.
And I will also add in there, if I was investing in non-student housing in student housing areas, I might have probably changed that as well. I would not be investing around the university as much, although we don't know what's going to happen. You don't know if this is all going to be resolved and universities are going to come back stronger than ever and change their business model, or who knows what, right? So it's hard to say, but short term, it looks like maybe student housing is going to be one of the harder hit areas, at least for a little while.
Yeah, no doubt.
Yeah.
So I just scrolled down in the comments and it still showed I had 45 new messages, and now I'm at the bottom and it went from 45 to like 4.
Oh,
I'm like,
good.
That's not a very good feature. Ty says thanks. And then Ashanti says, Can you repeat your comment about homeowners coverage versus HOA for damage to your home? It's really damage to the property that's covered by the HOA. So if you are there's two different ways to look at this. So if you are living in a property that has an HOA where it's the HOA is actually protecting and covering insurance wise some portion of the building, like the roof, which is typically not a single family home, right? Single family home, you're responsible for the building. The HOA is responsible for like street lights or potentially the roads or a parking lot or the grass and the mowing and snow removal from, public areas or a park or a swimming pool or a, public building and stuff like that. So if you're living in a single family home, this doesn't as much really apply, but it still probably applies because if there's a hail claim and you have a lot of HOA stuff that gets damaged, they could potentially come and say, hey, you owe us some money. For a condo where you're sharing the building and the HOA is responsible for the outside and the paint and the siding and the roof and the doors, like maybe not the doors, but like all the common stuff. In that case, your policy, if you're living there, needs to actually call your insurance company and say, hey, I want to make sure that if my HOA has a claim on the hail damage for the roof, that I'm able to pay if there's an overage for their deductible and it's not covered. And your insurance agent will be able to tell you, hey, it's a rider, it's already on your policy, probably if you're living there. But if not, then they can add it to your policy. And that basically protects you so that if they come and they say, hey, we had a claim on every building in the complex and our deductible is $500,000. Now we're going to assess each one of the units $5,000 because we don't have the money to pay for that. It was unexpected. Now that assessment actually gets paid most of the time in full by your insurance, which is awesome.
Yep, that's the tip.
All right. For properties in NOCO, what would you model appreciation and rent growth at over the next 5 years? Come on. You've been to enough classes. 3%.
I think they're, that's interesting. I think they're asking because with COVID, does that change? Has it changed since, COVID stuff?
Well, I think part of it is, are you trying to like figure out what your appreciation is across 5 years for some particular reason? Or are you holding these properties for 30 years and the average across 30 years is going to be 3 to 4%? Yeah. In which case, I personally don't care what it's going to be in the next 5 years because I'm holding longer than that.
And it may go down in the next 5 years for all we know, right? Sure. Like we could be at an interim peak and property values can flatline for the next couple of years. They could go down, they could flatline, they could go up. But if they flatline for the next couple of years while we're waiting for whatever to happen in COVID or politics or anything like that, school, CSU, then we could see a period where you don't have a real number for that. So to say like, what do you estimate? I don't know. And I don't even know what inflation is going to be for the next 5 years. Even though the Fed has said publicly they want to maintain 2%, they're also doing things that are going to make it really hard to maintain that 2%. So I don't know. If I were being conservative, I probably would use 2%. If I was being like a normal market conditions sort of thing, I might use 3. But I think that's between 2 and 3 seems really reasonable to me. But at the same time, it could be down. It could be negative for that. I will say the rent one, there is data that suggests, especially post-crisis, that rents have not declined. They've slowed. They've gone up less fast, but they have not actually declined. House value is totally different story. And this was in the class I think we did where we did cash flow Brian versus appreciation James. I showed charts giving you a breakdown of how many cities actually had negative appreciation, break-even appreciation, or small, modest appreciation, and then significant appreciation. And then I showed you the rent ones, and there were no rent ones that were negative.
Cash flow Brian.
Cash flow Brian.
Perfect. Next question. If I start nomading with single family home and a conventional loan, is there still a possibility to get FHA and multifamily as my second or third property?
There is a possibility. It is less likely. It is very low probability that you'll be able to convince an underwriter that you have a good reason for moving out of a single family home into a unit in a multifamily property. They're going to say, why do you want to go from living in a single family home to being a tenant or, a person living in attached buildings? And so you'd have to convince the underwriter that you're doing that for a valid reason. And unfortunately, because you're nomading is not a good enough reason for them.
Yep. Thanks for your time and willingness to share your knowledge. And then what are a few of your favorite real estate books? Sorry. So the number one, if you can see right there on my bookshelf, the blue book that James is pulling out, that's that one. The other books, I'll just tell you what the other books on my shelf are. I have Creating Wealth by Robert Allen.
It's only like one good chapter in that book, by the way.
Yeah, it's like one good section. We teach a class on it, so you can just go watch that class and skip buying the book. I have Rich Dad, Poor Dad, which is more a parable of a way to think. I do have two books from Bigger Pockets. They were Rental Property Investing and Managing Rental Properties. They're probably good for someone. I bought them when I was much further along and they did not provide a lot of value to me. So I can't super recommend them. I have some of James's books, Real Estate Investing Systems and the Big Black Book of Real Estate. And then I have Value
Brian,
of Debt books.
We really can't hear you when you turn your face because your volume goes way down.
What'd you miss?
Well, no, I think we got enough, but in an ideal world, you wouldn't turn and talk.
I would do this. And then talk here. Gotcha. What are a few of your other favorite books that I did not name?
As far as real estate specific ones, I like the Millionaire Real Estate Agent book as well as the Millionaire Real Estate Investor. I think both those are good. I also do like The One Thing book, but it's not real estate specific. It's more like, it's the inner game that allows you to do the real estate investing. I think that's important. I've got stuff on legal things like this book, which is an attorney book, The Digital Paper Trail in Real Estate Transactions. It's like all the stuff about legalese and contracts and stuff like that. Yeah, those are the ones I probably would call out by name.
Yeah.
They're probably...
You're missing this one.
Oh, Blink. Yeah, I do like Blink.
And you're missing this one.
Gambling Theory and Other Topics. I don't know if Gaming Theory. I don't know if I've ever read that one. The other topics one. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I also gave up a lot of my books. Oh, I have a whole bunch of other books. Yeah, I'll just say those. Those are probably the ones there.
I think that's good. And somebody says, how can I get the books from James? They're not on Amazon.
Yeah, that's unfortunate. And it was deliberate. It wasn't accidental. Like, I control that. I would say the book that you should get from me is at realestatefinancialplanner.com/book. That is the one I wrote for my son. I'll type it in here for you so you can see it. But as far as the other one goes, I don't think those are available. Like, the Nomad one is due to be rewritten because it's now, I don't know, 3 or 4 or 5 years old, whatever it is. So that one's due to be rewritten. Some of the other ones were Christmas gifts, and I'm no longer giving them away. So it's hard to get those, and I don't necessarily want them for sale. In case you guys don't know this, like, I am highly introverted and don't like my stuff out there, and I don't know.
Yeah, depending on how much it's worth, I have a signed copy of the big thick black book. You'd start making offers, and when we get to 5 figures, I'm definitely parting ways with it.
It says, "Dear Brian, I love you like a brother. Thank you, always, James." So that's what your book is gonna say on there. So if your name is Brian, that's awesome.
It actually just says, book number 2. Brian, you're amazing. Love, James.
That is pretty close. That's
so if you are, right. If your name is Brian, you can fit right in, and it is literally the second copy of the book.
It is. My mother got the first copy of that one. Yeah. Hers is numbered 1.
Yeah. So we're number 1, straight from the movie. So next question: how do you deal with an insane hike in a shared utility? For example, water, sewer bill for a small multifamily. And so the first thing I do is, especially if it's water, is I look for a leak. because leaks can cost you lots of money very, very, very quickly, especially with water leaks. Ask me how I know. Um, so I think if you have a utility hike where the utility company says, hey, it was $1 a gallon and now it's $5 a gallon or whatever, right? Obviously, water's not that expensive. But if that's what the case is, then hopefully you're already billing back to your tenants for that water. And over time, you increase what you're billing back. In the short term, like for me, I would be out for however many months until my next lease cycle was up where I could raise the bill back amount. And I think that's just part of the business, right? A short-term couple $100 a month hopefully doesn't make you, stress or lose the business, because that's what reserves are for. And that should be peanuts compared to what COVID could do in the next 5 years. So
Yeah. And if you missed the class last week, I would strongly encourage you to go listen to that. It has totally changed the game as far as how we analyze deals, and specifically how reserves relates to how we analyze deals. And if you go and you follow what we talk about in that class about your reserves, the $200 should not be a big deal for you.
And then what do you think of the ever repeated housing shortage within the next decade, given the demographics issues we have now?
Yeah.
So I've shown a graph or a chart on this where we are just so far, at least in Colorado, we are so far behind in where we would have been from building had the recession not happened, not the current one, the one before the current one, right? And we've just not caught up. And so I think you see evidence of this by days on market of houses. I think you see evidence of this by, houses being bid up. And so, it's not like there's not really a housing shortage. There actually is a housing shortage, and there's a housing shortage for affordable housing as well. So I think it's gonna be very interesting. James?
I added a additional recommendation for a book. I'm pretty sure you normally recommend this book, but I do think it's a good overview primer of the stuff on there. Yeah,
James, do you know how to change from all panelists to all panelists and attendees? Because both links that you've sent to so far are only to all panelists.
Oh, that's amazing.
That's terrible.
Cannot follow directions.
All right, James is getting muted.
Kick me off, please.
Can you and also you misspelled my name. So
really?
There's that.
Did I really? Oh
Yes.
my gosh, I do that all the time.
Yeah, you're gonna post the other. Yeah. So now that we've got, not sure Brain would recommend this one. Let me see what he's actually recommending. Oh yeah. Well, it's got 3 stars and only 12 ratings, and has sold 15 copies in the last 3 months.
And 10 of them are mine. Hey, so I will tell you that book, while it's controversial and it's sales pitchy, it does give you a decent overview of some of the basic concepts.
Yeah, and to be fair, if you can see my bookshelf, these binders right here, 1, 2, 3, and 4, was the beginning of my asset protection career. And in binder 1, it's literally that book.
Yeah.
So
and that book was and his binders were more than $18.
Yes, they were.
A lot more than $18.
Yes, they also were. So, yeah, I'm not even sure where to go. You violated all the rules. You spelled my name wrong.
It wasn't deliberate. It's yeah.
Yeah. So would it make any sense to meter utilities by person room? Not sure how that would work, so that you can charge people for what they actually use. Does anybody ever do that? It would probably cost you more to actually have separate meters installed by room or by even part of the building than it will to just bill back the average. Most people understand. And, if you have somebody that's just hey, we're using, I don't know, we just never turn our water off, and you notice a huge increase in usage, then go talk to your tenants. But before you accuse them of anything, go see, are my toilets constantly running in the building? Because I literally had a toilet constantly running for a month, and the tenant finally reported it, and it was way more of the utility bill. The utility company actually called, and they're like, hey, something's going on. So, I would not probably worry too much about trying to meter stuff by separate rooms. Let's see. James, if you start doing Nomad,
Yes.
Uh, will it be easier to finance the second home, or the interest will be higher for the risk? What should I plan to get an easy finance for the second home?
So it won't be easier to finance a second home. It'll be pretty much the same. In fact, it might be slightly harder if you have, if your rent you're getting from the first property with the lease you have signed is not enough to cover that times 75% is not enough to cover the expenses on the property. You may have to carry some of the first home from your payments from your actual paycheck, your other job, or whatever it is. So it could be a little harder. It's not easier to finance a second one, in my opinion. Will the interest be higher for the risk? No. The interest rates are typically the same as of right now. And of course, this could change in the future. I can't recall a time when it was different, but it's totally possible. Actually, I do know of a time when it was different. I think for a period of time, your fifth loan and beyond was a slightly higher interest rate. I think they penalized you for number 5 and beyond. But
It
that is
wasn't interest rate; it was down payment.
I think interest rate too, though.
Not when. Well, it could have
Yeah.
been that at some point, but it was just down payment.
So lender rules change all the time. Like let's look at a larger view of history. Right now, we are in an extremely friendly lending environment that allows you to buy essentially an unlimited number of 5% down owner occupant properties with 30-year fixed rate financing via conventional financing. That has not always been the case, and nor will it always be the case, in my opinion. I think that you can count on some point in time this changing, and you being it being harder for you to do that. So I think you do it while you can. And when it changes, we adapt our policies. We change our rules to be in compliance with whatever the then requirements are from the lenders. So is it going to be a higher interest rate for the risk? As of right now, no. It may be at some point in the future, but right now, no, that is not. And then what should I plan to get in easy financing for the second home? Not sure I understand that question, how to answer it. So if you want to clarify,
Like, what do I plan for to make sure my financing is easy? And it's basically making sure that you have enough income to support the property that you just bought and are moving out of, and make sure that your rent is high enough. Talk to your lender ahead of time, all the normal things.
Yeah, and I will post into the. Didn't we do a class on financing?
Yep. You gonna post something?
Yeah, I'm gonna post a link to it as soon as I find it.
Okay. Do you have anything else you want to add to that question?
No, I think I'm good. I'll send you the whole class on how to do financing.
Perfect. Next question is it typical to bill back utilities to a non-family household in Fort Collins? So I'm going to change the wording of that, because family is actually a protected class for like
familial status for fair housing.
It's really not family or non-family. I think what you mean is non-single family household, or something like that. And
roommates.
Yeah, if you have roommates, no. I mean, like if you're living in a single family home and you have 2 roommates, the lease states that you're responsible for the utilities. You need to put them in your own name, except obviously the HOA, which if part of the HOA is for trash or water, you can bill that back to them. But it's going to be a constant amount, in my opinion. However, if you are in a multifamily and it's like a fourplex, then yes, it's very typical, because water is typically on 1 meter. Electric and gas are typically on individual meters. So the tenant puts those in their name, and you will bill like water and sewer and potentially trash, it's typical, back to the tenants. And a lot of landlords don't do this, right? And it's essentially, in my opinion, if you are a tenant, in my mind, you expect to pay for your utilities. And so when you tell someone, oh yeah, hey, trash is $10 a month, water is $25 a month, it's not really a big deal. It's not like you're saying, hey, for $400 extra a month, you can have water, sewer, and trash.
Otherwise,
like,
you got to get your own.
Yeah. Otherwise, there's a porta pot out back. Have fun.
I think he's asking about if you are living in a property and you have like 3 roommates. That's how I interpreted that question. But I may be reading.
I think if you're doing that, I mean, we have several friends that are doing this, and I think what they're doing is the utility bill comes in, and it's like they put it on the counter, and they're like, you owe a fourth of it if there's 4 roommates. That's pretty typical. Or you can just say, hey, I'm going to just charge you a flat fee. If it's above that, I'll cover it. If it's below that, you're paying a little extra, and go from there and try and figure that out. But if I had roommates, I would just, hey, this is what the bill is this month. Pay your share.
Yep.
So, And if my roommate was James and he was like, I have a hot tub and I'm filling it with 400 gallons of water, I'd be like, you can pay the water bill this month.
Oh, I'm gonna use the neighbor's hose.
That's right. Hey, can I borrow your hose for a minute?
No, for about 4 hours.
Yeah, if you get enough hoses into the hot tub,
then you can
won't
do it
take
in an
long at all.
hour.
Yeah.
Oh man.
You can just use the sprinklers out back and have them, sprinkle into your hot tub. So Hunter says, I was thinking like in year 2 with Nomad, could you assign one person to cover utilities and have them work it out among themselves, billing it back to that person?
I wouldn't.
Yeah. I mean, typically, if I'm in the Nomad, I'm going to have my name on the utilities and only my name to make sure they get paid. So even if my roommates don't pay, and then I'm dealing with my roommate as necessary, but I'm making sure my utilities get paid and not shut off.
See, I interpret what he's asking is like when it becomes a regular rental, that's when it goes into whoever's on the lease's name and they're paying their own utilities and they're figuring all that out.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah.
And if one of the people that's moving in, like if you have 3 different people that are all roommates and they're all moving in and one of them wants to put the utilities in their name and handle it, it's up to them.
That's them.
You don't care. It's not your problem.
Yeah.
You just care that they pay it and they pay the last bill because water is lienable. And if you don't pay your final water bill, the water portion can actually end up as a lien on your house. Yeah. So
make sure you have a landlord policy so that you get notified if the thing is not paid.
Yep. And make sure you have a don't shut it off policy so that it reverts to your name and doesn't get shut off.
Yeah. Good point.
Yeah.
Wow. Cool. Did we really get through all the questions? That's awesome. Let me bring my list out of all the questions I've got.
Oh, excellent. You got questions for me? Because it's asked me almost anything. And so far,
we haven't gotten any personal questions.
What's my full-time job?
All right. And how much money do you make? And how many houses do you have?
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh man, 0. That's awesome.
Yeah. Cool. Well, if no one has any more questions,
I agree. We can go hang out.
Yeah.
Oh wait, someone's popping up.
Oh man, you take that first.
If I were to start afresh, what would I do differently? You take that first.
I'll be back.
Man, if I were to start afresh, I think even starting afresh, it matters like why I'm starting afresh, what resources I have, why I'm doing stuff. I will tell you that I think Nomad, if you're willing to do it, is by far the best strategy right now. I think that's a pretty compelling strategy. If you have certain skills, though, like we've been doing real estate investor story time lately, and if you have certain skills, like we did one where we had a salesperson and they were really good at building rapport, love to negotiate deals and structure win-win agreements and do that. And so they opted to do creative financing. They opted to do some marketing and go find deals off market and acquire properties that way. So I think if that's your skill set and you are starting afresh, then you do that. If you were starting fresh and you have, $5 million in the bank, I think your plans change. I think also what your skills going into the starting fresh were. Like if you had a strength in doing large apartment deals or doing syndications, or you were more of a passive partner where you were the cash partner or the loan partner. All those things matter as to like what your strengths and what your weaknesses and what resources you have as to which way you go. So it's a really hard question to answer. I think that's the way I would do it. You're very welcome, Carlos. You're very welcome, Ty. Yeah, we miss seeing you too. We haven't seen you in a while. Carlos says, but if you are 55 and only have one house, how will that change your strategy? So what I just said is still applicable. So let me give you an example, Carlos. If you were 55 and you were the type of guy that could sell ice to Eskimos, and you are way behind on retirement, doing Nomad for the next 10 years to try to get to your portfolio might be too slow for you. But if you were a salesperson and you had major sales skills and you were not afraid of spending money on marketing in order to find, motivated sellers to talk to and structure win-win deals where you could acquire properties creatively, you could acquire the equivalent of 10 Nomad properties if you had the down payments to kind of like give to the motivated sellers in order to get them to do it. You could acquire 10 motivated seller properties within 6 months. I think the most I ever did, oh man, I don't remember this number anymore. I think it was 6 in 6 weeks. But that was crazy. It was like just ridiculous amounts of work and effort to acquire 6 properties in 6 weeks off market creatively. Most of them with creative financing. That's a lot of effort. I mean, that's crazy, crazy hard. But if that's your skill set, then you could do that. If you don't have those skills, you don't even know what I'm talking about. Nomad is probably one of the easiest, the best return. I would argue one of the safest ways to actually do the strategy and get it done. And so if you have time and you have a little bit of resources, that's probably the best way to do it. So Chris says, are you going to add reserves into the spreadsheet by 1 a.m. tonight? Reserves are, as you may have heard in last week's class, Brian's spreadsheet already takes into account reserves. He already has the field set up for that. So there's nothing. That's right. It's like if you go to realestatefinancialplanner.com/spreadsheet, you could download Brian's spreadsheet, which has currently the reserve section in it. And I even showed you how to do some extra cell formulas in order to make it so that you have to do less manual work, but it's already there. It's like, it works exactly right.
Yeah. So did you cover the if you're 55 one?
I did. And I tried to cover it by example of, it really depends on like what your skills are and what your resources you have are. If you have $5 million in the bank, that gets answered very differently than if you have no money and you could sell.
Yep.
So,
yeah. So I want to go back to the question that you were answering when I left.
Okay.
Apparently you didn't have many things you'd do differently because I got back and you're on a different question. So, I don't know what you said. So I assume
this is good. Now we get to see what you say without being tainted by my answer.
Oh yeah, I'm not tainted. So I think what I was thinking about this question while I was gone, I was thinking, this is actually a really good almost way of finding an actual investor who is probably really investing. Like if you ask this question and the investor was like, not much really. I mean, I this one time I spent an extra $10,000 on a flip that I shouldn't have spent. If that's their answer, chances are high they're not really thinking about what they've done, or they just haven't done a lot. So I think in some sense, I was like, oh, that's actually a really good question. If you were like going to an investor meeting, hey, what would you do differently if you got to start over? Because I've shared some of this in classes, right? Like my first 4 loans, like I would have totally done them differently. I would have not bought a 5th property until the 4th one had closed. Like there's all sorts of things here where, you just learn. I would not have sold an 8-plex that I sold. I probably would not have sold a 4-plex that I sold. I probably would have hung on to another property that I had under contract and then, didn't buy it because they hand packed the dirt around the foundation. So I think there are, countless things that you look back and if you're being honest and, you go, yeah, I could have done a lot of things differently, but in the same boat, I also look back and I go, all of those things helped me learn something every time. And so without having done that, I probably wouldn't be where I am and I wouldn't know as much as I do because I would not have learned from making the decision that I now think, oh, I would have made a different decision knowing what I know today. Like I missed out on buying a 4-plex that backs to a small lake in a park that if I would have bid $10,000 more for, like 2 years later, I could have probably made $350,000 by selling it. Like it's dumb stuff like that where you're like, man, you were just not thinking about the big picture. So I think if one thing comes to mind for me, it's keep the bigger, longer term picture in focus, because without that, you start going, oh man, this property has been vacant for a month. Who cares? Like, I know that sounds really rash, but literally, who cares? Like, you should have reserves to cover that, and it shouldn't make you lose sleep at night. And if it does, you need more reserves. Like, you really do. So find the bigger picture, focus on where you're going, and learn to look past all the little crap that is going to happen and is going to be super frustrating. Oh, this tenant didn't move out on time. Oh, the builder didn't get my house done on time. Like, all that stuff has happened to me, but it's in the past. I don't remember it until someone asks me to like try and dig it up. Right. What I remember is, hey, I bought a bunch of houses and they make good money. Right. Like, that's my full-time job. So that's my take.
That's my full-time job. to answer another question from tonight.
Yeah. Who do you know that I should know? Bill Gates.
Hey, I want to comment on your answer, which was very different than mine. I think
Sure.
you're more, I don't know, introspective. You like look back at things you did and you sort of analyze those. And I'm not sure if that's like super common or everyone does that except for James, but I'm not sure I do the same thing that way. I don't know. It's just weird. Because I didn't look at the question the same way you did, and I'm just trying to figure out what was the difference.
The difference was I had an extra 3 minutes to think about it in silence.
Yeah, maybe that's what it was.
Yeah, I don't know if there's anyone. The who should I know? Who do you know that I should know? Question is really, man. This is really like walking up to James or I in class and asking us to be your mentor. And I'm not really picking on you, so don't take it that way. But this happens quite frequently, and it's really, hey, in a sense, this is, can you do all the work and just tell me the best people without me giving you any value? And I get we're in a class situation where you can't really give us any value because you're not allowed to talk. But in a sense, that's what that question is. So, asking it here is totally fine. And, the problem is I don't know what you do or what you're trying to do. So I can't really answer that anyway. And even if I knew, hey, if you're like, hey, I'm looking for a really good electrician, I can totally tell you who to go to. If you're like, hey, who's the best real estate agent? I can tell you who to go to. He's on the call. His name is, it's James. There he is right there. But outside of that, it's like, what bank do you use or what's the best lender? It's like, it's a comparison you got to go do, and you got to do the work to find what works for you and what your personality is and how you work with people. So it's a really large question that's almost impossible for me to answer, other than like, in jest, it's like Bill Gates, or, a number of other people that, I know who, are like that, but those are not really relevant. So,
and even like, to use your example of the lender changes depending on what you're trying to do and over time and what the specific situation is, because you may go to one lender if you could now to do something, but you may not be able to go back there because you're in a very different situation. And so your recommendation may be someone completely different now. I don't know. Things like that happen.
Yeah. So, I mean, if you have a more specific question and you're looking for something specific, please ask, but it's not like, in a sense, like I could say, well, I have a private lender and their name is this and their phone number is this, and I can tell you what will happen when you call. You will get nowhere.
It's not gonna go very well for you.
Yeah, because they don't have a relationship with you, and you have to build that relationship through building trust and time and effort and work. It's not as simple as a phone call where, a business that's doing lending, oh, hey, go call, so-and-so at this hard money lending shop. They will take your call. But like the people who you really end up wanting to build relationships with, in my opinion, and have been super useful and super successful and helped me build my business, those are all relationships that came from showing up at class every week and meeting people and talking to people, and who comes back and who asks questions that are, sensible, and who takes action. And then are those people I'd want to work with or partner with? And then, you bring a deal and say, hey, here's the deal that I have. Who is interested in partnering? And you put that out there and you see who comes to you, and you're offering value by, hey, I've got a deal. That's how I think you end up finding true value relationships, right? You bring something to the table, and then, it might be a year before you get value back, but that's okay. Right.
And it may not come from that person. It may come,
from a circle.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Let's see. CC says, well, I should have added knowing what you know now to the, what would you, if you started afresh?
But I think even that is, do we have resources? I mean, do we have money? Do we have the ability to get loans? Do you not have the ability to get loans? Are you still married? Are your kids in the house? I mean, I think all of these things have an impact on what you do that might be different than what you did before, partly because of just situation.
Yeah. So Nathan has a really interesting question.
I agree. I
like this question.
Yeah.
And he says this is probably entirely situational, but how much leverage is too much? Go until you can't qualify for a loan. And it is totally situational, right? And so if you were, 60, my answer would be different. If you were, fresh out of school, my answer would be different. I do think that reading those books right there, the Value of Debt books, will at least lead you to think about this in a different way. But for me, I think if I was you, knowing what I know, I would probably go until you can't qualify for a loan.
I would add to that, you should have fully fleshed out reserves.
Agreed. But given fully fleshed out reserves, where you probably are in life, I would pedal down hardcore until I couldn't qualify for a loan. And then I would really understand what's preventing me from qualifying and can I fix it?
Yeah. I actually have similar advice for you in that situation. As long as your reserves, and if for me personally, in your situation, I probably would do more than the 6 months reserves, just because I'd want to make sure I was pretty well, backed by that stuff. But I probably would be very aggressive.
Yep. And I think, if that entails, going outside of just Nomad, then do that. Like whatever your goal is, pedal down when you are, I think I'll generalize. If you are in the younger camp and you are like, hey, I've got enough to go do a Nomad. I can maybe stretch and get, 20% down investment property as well during the year. It might delay my next Nomad just a little. Like for me personally, I would say go. Yeah. And the reason for that is if something goes wrong in the very beginning, like it's much better to have it go wrong when you're 25 or 30 or 35 than when you're 65.
Yeah.
Because at 65, the time left on the clock is not enough necessarily to make up the principal portion that you are putting at risk.
Yeah.
So I think, this is just like if you went to a financial advisor and said, hey, I'm 20 and I'm making this much a year. What do I invest in? They're going to be more aggressive. And then over time, they're going to tailor that back. They're going to spread things out. And as you get older, they're going to pull out of the more aggressive things and be much more conservative to make sure that you have the money you need.
Depending on who it is and what their risk tolerance is. But yes, I agree in general.
Totally.
Yeah.
So
and
that answers the question.
This is very situational. The advice we gave you may not apply and probably does not apply to a lot of the people on the call.
Right. Yeah. If you have reserves and you're able to buy a property and you are knowledgeable about what you're doing, you've analyzed the deal. Because the other situation is, just because you can buy a property doesn't mean you should, right? You need to buy the right property because buying it right is going to make a big difference.
Yeah. And I will tell you right now, there is a asset that you can acquire with these really low interest rate loans. So those are valuable things in themselves.
Yep.
So, and we're in an all-time low environment.
Until tomorrow when they're even lower.
It's been crazy. I think I saw an email came today that said they were lower.
Yeah, it is. It is crazy. Oh man.
Yeah.
So I think we made it through the second wave of questions, which is more than we can say for the US and COVID.
Oh my gosh. All right. Well, thank you for coming on and doing answers, Brian. I appreciate it because I didn't have to do anything. So thanks.
Sweet. So with that, I think we'll probably end and then we'll hang out for a little bit or what's your plan?
It's up to you. I'll hang out for a few minutes and then I have to go talk to Tammy. So I only jumped off the call to tell her there was some noise in the background.
Oh, gotcha. Yeah, I will. I'll hang out for a little bit until my dinner arrives. And then if we're still going with questions, I can hang out, but probably won't hang out for a long time.
All right, cool. And I'll tell people that are on this recording, there are literally like 257 2-hour classes on a huge range of topics. And probably, 40 of them are completely open to the public. So most of the stuff on how to get your first deal done is open to the public. And they're on I'll even tell you the link. It's all free real estate classes. Well, I'll do this. Here's the link to all 257. And they're on the podcast too. So if you'd rather listen in the car, you can.
Yep.
And then here are the free ones. And they overlap. So, all right, that's all I got. Thank you, Brian. I do appreciate you coming on and answering questions. Thank you.
You bet. Thanks, everybody. We will see you next week.
Have a good night.
Bye for now.